Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Hero Voices. This is your host, Kay Did, and this is a podcast where we tell stories, give resources, and change the narrative of homelessness. And let me just get some housekeeping out of the way. So, guys, we are growing on YouTube. I'm so proud of y'all for listening to us and interacting and giving comments. I love reading the comments. I love to hear that we're helping you. And if you feel like any way that we can give you more help and more resources, definitely DM me. Or if you are not shy, you could put it in the YouTube comments and I can read it on here. And apparently on the Spotify, they have comments on there too. I read so far we have one comment, but I was excited about that one comment and I wrote back kind of late, but I did write back and I'm trying to keep up with all the people sending me information and what they might need or would like to see. Another thing is please follow us on Instagram, follow us on TikTok and things like that. If you have any concerns, like I say in all of the episodes, you could definitely DM me and I could help you as much as I can. We can help you with school resources, shelter resources, prevention from going to shelter, aftercare in certain aspects. We can help you with those kind of things. If you would like to be on the podcast, please DM us. We would love to have you on. I would love to speak to you, whether you're a person with experience or a person with a resource. We need both sides to make sure that everybody can be able to hear the story, but also give help to the person who would in that story, the problem they might have. So, and everybody has different walks of life. Everybody comes to homelessness or housing insecurity differently. The requirements are for people with lived experience are that you lived in this happened in the US, that we're doing all the states, right? And that you were homeless with a child under 21. And the reason why it's not 18 anymore is because the path rules for New York City, which is where I'm based in, if you don't know, NYC, the rule is 21 and under for path, which is where we go for intake center in the Bronx. So I'm using their rules to go by their criteria, what we do for the podcast. So that's why that age might seem kind of like, why 21? But I'm going by the rules they give for New York City for families. So that's why. So today we have a guest. I always have a guest, right? And we are talking about resources, and we're talking about Anthos Homes. And right now, our guest today is Laura, and she's going to be representing the resource. Can you tell us a little bit about you, Laura, and what you do?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be on your podcast, which is such a great resource.
Thank you.
I'm Laura Lazarus. I am the CEO and co-founder of Anthos Home, which is a very new organization, but I've spent my entire career in affordable housing. I've worked as a developer, building and rehabbing housing. I've worked for the government, worked for the Housing Preservation and Development Department here in New York. I've worked for several nonprofits where I've overseen a women's mental health shelter. I've also overseen 1,400 units of supportive housing. So I've really seen kind of the affordable housing world from all aspects, and um, really glad that I could put that knowledge and experience to work at Anthos Home over the last couple of years.
It sounds like you have done a lot. I didn't know that you had that long portfolio of things that you have done, but it seemed like you're well-rounded in what you do and kind of seeing the background of how everything is with the people. I seem like everything will be in New York City. That's what it sounds like, and that you really know a lot about what we have, the problems we might have here, and how to kind of help the people here with those kind of resources and things like that. Can you
Yeah,
tell
no, I hope so. I hope so.
us? We can't know it all, right? So,
Cannot know it all,
right.
but
So,
hopefully enough.
right. As to make sure we do the best that we can do for the people that we work for. And can you tell us a little bit about Anthos Homes?
So Anthos Home was really created to help solve a problem, which I'm sure you and your listeners are really familiar with, which is it's a problem to address homelessness. And the idea behind Anthos Home is really to help address the problem, which is housing vouchers, rental subsidies, Section 8, all of those terms relate to the kind of support that the government can provide low-income people to help them afford a home. But the problem, as I'm sure you know, is that it's really difficult to access housing vouchers. And nationally, 40% of vouchers go unused. In New York City, it can take a really long time to find an apartment, and sometimes you're not able to even find an apartment, um, even if you have a voucher. And so the idea behind Anthos Home is to help people find units with vouchers as quickly as possible. Our goal is 2 months. Um, And so it's really to help expedite and make it easier for both tenants and landlords to use vouchers to help people move out of homelessness into permanent housing.
Sounds interesting. My first thing is, how did you get to the time 2 months? As you know, as I said before, it does take people a long time to find housing. How do you get to that 2 months marker, and how are your success rates for that?
So when my co-founder and I, Leslie Abbey, were trying to figure out how to solve this problem, like was there a way to do this to help people move from shelter into permanent housing more quickly? As um, in the latest government statistics in New York, it takes families on average more than 2 years to find a home. So we just thought, is there a better way to do that? And we actually ended up looking around the country for models, and we ended up with a model in California, which is called Brilliant Corners. They're a nonprofit. And in their model, which we've adopted, and I can tell you more about it, it takes them actually 1 month from referral to placement.
Oh,
In New
wow.
York, because of a couple of issues, we think that 2 months is more realistic. And
Right.
right now, it's taking us about 3 to 4 months on average for once somebody is referred to us to help them move into a home. So we're not at our goal yet, but the goal we think should be closer to 2 months if we can make it happen.
Got it. You could tell us more about the program from California and see how you compared or what you got from them to use. Because I feel like we always have to look at other models, but as you said, we have to adapt it to what we have here because 1 month would be nice to believe, but it's not realistic for New York City.
Right. So what we've adopted from the LA model, they call it the flexible pool model, flexible subsidy pool model. Um, and what we've adopted is we've adopted almost everything that we can to New York. And so the first thing is that we have a flexible pool of funding. And what that means is we can kind of do whatever it takes within reason to help makes it possible for someone to move into permanent housing. So that includes things like making repairs to units so that they pass the inspection requirements.
Right.
It also includes paying for things like application fees, moving costs, furniture, and then also funding help once somebody has moved in to make sure that they stay stably housed. So that's the flexible pool piece. In addition, we have a very strong network of landlords and brokers that we work with throughout New York to create a reserve of units that are available for the tenants, future tenants that we work with. And we create those relationships with landlords and brokers because of the support that we can provide. So we call it a pool of units or a bank of units, housing units that are available so that when somebody is referred to us, we can take them to go see a unit ideally within 1 or 2 weeks, if that makes sense. And
Mhm.
then we basically have a set of experts for kind of every aspect of the process. So we have a housing team. They focus on those landlord and broker relationships, and you know that that is a certain special kind of people with real
Right.
skills, to really understand the New York housing market.
Right.
We have an amazing tenant team. They work with any referrals that come into us. They help them we work with them to understand what their needs are, what kind of unit they need, what does the voucher allow, where do they want to live, what do they need in their unit, do they need any kind of accessibility? And then they really accompany them on the process. So they will go to unit viewings with them. They will educate them on what the lease requires, what the financial obligations are, what the utilities might be. They'll help support them in setting up all of those, like the utilities when they move in. And then
Mm,
they'll stay attached to that household for at least a year to provide services once somebody has moved in. And that support afterwards is also really unique, as you probably know, in New York.
right.
Typically, if somebody has moved in from a shelter and they're going into kind of independent housing, they won't get support. But through our flex pool, we can help with things like emergencies if the tenant is not able to make their tenant share payment that month, or if the government fails to make a payment for 1 or 2 or 3 months in a row, which has happened. We can cover that payment for the landlord while we sort out with the government agency what's going on and try to, unravel the problem. In addition, we can help with repairs, with arrears, for example. Um, so those are kind of the key elements of the model. We have a flexible pool of funding. We provide a housing pool. There's an available housing that's in place for people who come to work with us. And then we provide these aftercare services along with experts along the way. Oh, I forgot one other expert team is our operations team. They are the ones that really facilitate the processing of the voucher. So they work very closely with the future tenant and with the landlord in making sure all of that documentation is correct. And they actually help shepherd it through whichever government agency that paperwork is going through. And then they help with kind of administering the repairs that I talked about, the moving costs, application fees, all of those things. And we work with any kind of voucher. So that was
So
a answer.
no, but it's all needed. It's good to have the information. So do a person just walk in to Anthos Homes, or do they have to go to a provider that works with Anthos Homes already?
Yes, unfortunately, it's the latter. We have a contract with Administration for Children's Services where we work very closely with that agency, and they provide us referrals for young adults aging out of foster care and also any families who are in shelter, who have a voucher, who are part of, are involved with child welfare can be referred to us as well. And there are 1,300 families right now in shelter who are involved with ACS. So there are a good number of families there. In addition, we also work with people who have high health needs that might have been having difficulty finding housing. So that's the other kind of pool, but it's not an open referral system. We're working with specific agencies.
Was it always a setup like that, or is that just what was easier to do instead of trying to do a whole shelter system in New York City?
Yes, I think because we started we were created in the summer of 2022 and we received our
Um,
first initial foundation funding in the winter of 2023. And our government contract with ACS started in the summer of 2023. So we've really only been in operation for a year. We hope that we'll be able to grow to serve people, all sorts of people who are coming out of the shelter system, but we had to start small.
right.
So that's kind of how we're starting and we're growing. But right now we can't, unfortunately, we cannot serve everybody who's currently in shelter. But we would love to do, more and more people as the years go on, as we get larger and, um, have more experience.
To be honest, your hands are pretty full. You said 1,300 families in shelter right now, and that's not including the people with who have the needs and the people who are aging out, that people might think sometimes I think people think a way about how certain people only serve a certain population, but the population they have is really a big population as it is, and it's hard
Yes,
to serve everybody, and you get overwhelmed when you have a lot 20,000, 40,000 people coming in for a problem, and you're not like a 45,000 people workforce that you could work. You have a smaller team compared to like HRA or something like that because they can serve the masses, even though they are underfunded and they are overworked and they don't have enough staff there compared to your team. Your team is much smaller, so you can only work what you want to work with, not what you want to work, but what you can actually handle and actually
exactly.
make sense to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, so just be mindful of that when you're listening to this podcast. This is not like a 20,000 people workforce. It's not that. And sometimes if you cater to certain populations, you do get things cut down a little bit faster because you're catered to a certain niche of certain things. And if you don't know, New York City is broken down. I call it the six parts. It's really five parts, but with the Hercs in is kind of the extra six part in my head. But we have DV, we have men and women single shelters, we have family shelters, and we have families with adults. So the way New York City breaks down each sector, they have different rules. Sometimes they have basically the same vouchers, but depending on what you have in your family is how you are in that particular voucher. So example, city FEPS, you have to be a citizen or resident to get that. And if five people in your family are not citizens, but one person is, the sixth person, you only are qualified for a studio because only one person qualified. So it all depends on the family dynamics and things like that on certain things. And is sometimes people have to hone in on certain particular groups to be able to help them the best that they can. And with people also in this field who end up leaving a lot because they are underworked and it's overworked and underpaid, they a lot of time get people who are green under, the neck, and they have to kind of catch them up and is to do so many systems at one time. to catch them can be overwhelming. And because of that, that person does not stay as long as a person will stay like back in the days for 20, 30 years in a position. So just be mindful of those things. Um, this sounds like a very like good opportunity if you are in the shelter and you do qualify for this particular program. It sounds like you can get help, and I know that a lot of housing specialists will definitely love a thing like this just because it sounds helpful and it sounds like it's another resource they can use to actually get their people out of shelter and things like that. So and having an ACS case is not fun, let me tell you. So if you can get housing, if you can make sure your family's together and things like that, and to be in a safe environment, not just a place like, oh, because it's cheap here, I want to get out of shelter, but really have a person to sit down and really give you the pros and cons and how things actually work and how the vouchers actually work. Sometimes being in shelter you don't actually learn how the voucher work. You just kind of you got a shopping letter. Now go out there like a baby bird without me showing you how to fly, but you have to get a house. You have to, and hopefully,
Right. No, exactly.
yeah,
It's very complicated, this
it is.
process. So we're really here to try and help make it easier. Not just for the tenant though, it's also for the landlord because
Right.
we want to encourage more landlords to rent to people with vouchers and make it easier for them so that we kind of see more landlords in the process.
I like that you said that. If you don't know, I don't know about other states. I just know about New York the most in a lot of things, which is my niche because I live in New York. If you didn't know, if I didn't say that before, um, but a lot of landlords have gotten burnt by the system, and that's because sometimes they don't have the proper information given to them in the beginning how the system actually works. And we want to make sure a lot of landlords stop doing discrimination against, which technically is against the law. But we're so overpacked in New York City, it's kind of hard to get the people who are doing the wrong things. So to have a housing specialist who's also helping landlords to understand the process and like understand how certain things are done, and also you have flexible funds to kind of saying, I know it's taking a long time for this process. Can you hold the apartment still and still get a little money? Because it could be hard for especially a smaller landlord to have their apartment open for 3, 4 months without getting money, and other things have to be like there's other things happening in the building. The building has to get fixed. A pipe might burst. All these things happen when you are a you own real estate that we don't think about until you actually own it. Like, oh, I might have to get the furnace done every couple of years or this thing fixed and that thing fixed. And that costs money. It's not, especially nowadays, things are not cheap. And they're not also built the greatest as it used to be back in the day. So to make sure that we can kind of hold the landlord's hand to kind of go through that process, I think is honestly very awesome, to be honest.
No, it was one of the first young adults we worked with. She had found an apartment in Staten Island, and it was a woman who owned like a two-bedroom house, I mean a two-unit house.
Right.
The owner of the unit actually lived in Florida most of the year, and she had never rented to somebody with a voucher. And
Mm,
so we really just held her hand every step of the way. She also didn't really like to use the internet, so we FedExed her documents
mhm.
and walked her through them on the phone to make sure she understood what she was signing and
Right.
really just held her hand that whole way. And then the young adult was able to have this great unit that she wanted in Staten Island, with a voucher. So it was a great way to kind of help support this homeowner who probably never would have thought about renting to somebody with a voucher without this help.
And I almost forgot about the youth part. It's good that your organization does help people, young adults. Even myself, as an older adult, sometimes it can be kind of you don't know what to do. I've never actually moved in an apartment by myself. I came from shelter to NYCHA, so that's much different than actually going to a real apartment with quotes in the air
Mm.
because it's a different process, compared to you have to get all the brokers free and all these things together. I've never experienced that, so I feel like I'm still like a young adult in that way and never
Mhm.
grown in that part. But to make sure that you can help a young adult get into their first place probably and to make them understand how this process actually works and how things are going, I think is pretty cool work there also.
Thank you. Yeah, there was a young adult. We moved into an apartment in Coney Island, and he had been looking for that apartment for a year before he was referred to us. And then we were able to actually move him within, I think, 3 months of being referred to us. And once he got in, he had all that support that we talked about. But once he was in there, he realized he wasn't able to use the portal that the property management company wanted him to use to pay his rent. So
Got
he
it.
reached out to his tenant coordinator, who helped him figure it out with property management. And so, everything's been great since then.
That's
So, but that could be a problem, right? If he wasn't able to actually pay his rent, then he would start creating problems, generating arrears just because of this small thing that
right.
was solved with some help.
Exactly. I want to know if a landlord wanted to get in your program, what would they have to do? What would they have to look for? And what guidelines would they have to like? Do you do buildings inspections first? How does that go?
We would love for any landlord or broker to reach out to us. We are super interested in working with anybody. We do go out and look at units initially to make sure that they pass inspections. All of our staff are trained in the city FEPS, that's the city issued voucher inspection requirements. And we are very familiar with the Section 8 requirements as well. So we'll go out and take a look at a unit and make sure it meets the inspection requirements. Or if it doesn't, we'll identify what repairs need to be done and discuss with the landlord who can take responsibility for that. We do find almost always there are issues with repairs. They're often modest. Let's say an outlet isn't working, or the window lock is not properly sealed, or there needs to be some painting. So they're fairly minor. And so sometimes we will take care of it through our flexible pool, or the landlord will. And once we agree to that, then we actually submit their address to the Department of Homeless Services. They have to do they call it a pre-clearance check. And once it's been approved, then we can move forward with partnering with them and discussing, what that looks like in terms of renting to somebody. They have to be open, obviously, to renting to somebody with a voucher. The
Right.
apartment rent has to meet the voucher requirements. As you may know, vouchers only allow up to certain amounts of rent. So they're not, they're in a kind of more reasonable fair market rent levels
Right.
that the city and the federal government agree to. So as long as they do that, then what happens is we then start taking tenants to see those units that the landlords offer. If a tenant selects that unit, our tenant team puts together the package that the landlord requires. They can use whatever package they typically require. We will advocate for the tenant on behalf of the landlord, and then we expect the landlord to pick at least one of the first three people that we present to them. And then once they accept, then they're expected, we work closely with them to get their paperwork that's needed for the voucher, and then we process that. We also review their lease that the landlord provides. We want to make sure that they're using a kind of an approved lease.
Right.
So we take a look at actually what the lease is that they use um, to help. This is kind of an added protection for tenants as well.
Got it. That's interesting. Because I honestly, I just signed the lease. I don't actually feel like I read through the lease properly. I'm just like, yeah, I need somewhere to live. So it's like, I feel like when you're in survival mode, especially
Right.
coming from shelter, you don't read the proper fine print. You just want to get out because you know that's better than where you were. And then you
Yeah.
get there like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was happening. But you're like, I'm here now. So you just have to kind of go on. And it's good that you help people. I'm not sure if you make the the person who's moving in actually look at the lease, or you just make your housing team look
Yes.
at the lease.
No, we like to, I mean, we can't make anyone do anything, but
You just
ideally we sit
me.
down and we actually walk through the lease with all future tenants so they understand what they're signing, they understand what the obligations are. Each lease, some leases might have house rules, in terms of noise or kind of guests, all of those things we'll walk through with them so that they really understand their obligations.
That's good to be informed. A lot of us, I think in general, especially like when we do these apps online, we just kind of like we get the point. We just kind of check, and we don't actually read what's happening in the background. So it's good that you explain what they're walking into. Like I said before, in survival mode, you could kind of just do anything just to get out the situation and not realize what the next situation you might put your actual self in and put your family in. So I think that's a good resource to have. I
Thank
want
you.
to also talk about, like we talked about this before, but the aftercare, which a lot of
Mhm.
programs in New York City do not have aftercare. We push a lot for aftercare, and people don't understand. People might think like you just moved into an apartment, so you should be fine now. But after you're left out there, like get pushed out on the not the street, but pushed out into an apartment, there's a lot of different things what might pop up for a person but they might not, if it's their first time apartment, they might not understand, or just things just happen because we are humans and things literally happen out of nowhere. We saw that in COVID. We were just smiling one day, the next day, we were frantic for our lives. So we know how this can happen. I think people kind of forget because we're kind of years away from this, but it's still happening now. And, it's just not as big as it was before. But when you first move out of shelter, you are not really on solid ground just yet. And you have to make sure that you're prepared, like to help prepare people on how to, they know if anything happens, they can still call on you. It's not like shelters that's like, bye, all right, good luck. Hopefully you make it. Hopefully you don't drown this time, kind of thing. So I'm happy that component is in there. And you said for a year. So if a person you saw was still struggling after a year, were they able to still get funding or get help after that? Or do you try to give them to a different organization to kind of who could help them more with aftercare?
So we definitely provide aftercare for the 1 year. And just to describe what that means is, there's a tenant coordinator assigned. They go out and meet with them in person within the first month, and then quarterly in person. And then they check in on them formally once a month. We hear from people many more times than that through texting and emailing and calling. And, like you said, we're really there because it is really quite an unstable time once you've moved into an apartment. I mean, even for somebody who's not coming out of shelter, you're figuring out how the new apartment works. You're figuring out how utility works. You're figuring out some of the challenges. Sometimes, for example, as you may know, um, you've been approved with a voucher, and let's say you had a job at the time you applied for the voucher, but maybe that job has reduced its hours, by the time you actually move into the apartment, so you can't actually afford the tenant share that you were originally approved for. So
Right,
we'll help that tenant resubmit their voucher documentation to get their tenant share adjusted. And we'll also help cover their tenant share during that period of time so that they don't fall into arrears. And also so that the landlord continues to be made whole during that time.
right.
Um, we have lots of examples of how we play a role in that aftercare piece. Our goal is to make sure that everyone gets recertified. Every voucher requires recertification at the 1 year mark. So we start working with them 3 months beforehand, getting the landlord documents, the tenant documents, everything in place. And our goal is for them to graduate. Now, we are assuming about 20% may still need our help going forward after that year. And so we're kind of assuming that that will be the case going forward.
Right.
And then, we're also not case managers. So we're not providing health support. We're not providing education or employment. And so we really are trying during this period of time, that 1 year, to make sure that the family that's moved in has the additional supports from other organizations that can provide those services. So, for example, for young adults aging out of foster care, they should have access to what's called a Fair Futures coach. You may be familiar with them. They work with young adults up until the age of 26 on all of those kind of health, education, employment aspects of their lives. So that's how we try to kind of maximize our services, but not become kind of supportive housing, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. It definitely does. Because it was sounding kind of supportive housing-ish, to be honest. But then when
Right.
you wait to make sure people understand that it's not all those services is just housing to really
Yes,
kind of get you through the time. And then I take the wheels off, the extra wheels, the tricycle wheels off the bike, and to make sure you can flourish by yourself after that year is over.
exactly. It's really about we like to think of it as making sure that there's housing stability and that the household that moves in really understands how they can maintain their housing for the long term.
Understood. So I'm happy that this program is around, and I want to say if any landlords again that is hearing this and they would like to be a part of this solution of housing people and getting guaranteed money from the government every every month. I'm not gonna lie to you, it might not be on time for certain ways, but they're gonna be at those homes is gonna be a little buffer in the middle to make sure everything goes off correct and make sure everything, at least for the first year, is done correctly. And once they do the first recertification, is really good for 2 years. If you think about them really making sure that part is together. So if you would love to be a part of this program, landlords, please, big and small, We would love you to be a part of this team and to help out people in New York City who have vouchers. A lot of people are out there with voucher in hand and cannot find a thing to go to or find something appropriate to go to. Or, example, one of the things was a big thing is inspections being failed. But if they come in and help you with those inspections to make sure, or you help yourself with the inspections to make sure your house is up to code from what the city needs from you, you can have a tenant fast, you know? So think about that. Think about the families you can help. The family will grow up in your apartment and you'll be part of their success story. Think about how you're helping your community thrive. So, do you have any last words for the people of New York?
No, I mean, we are just excited to be able to help provide this service. We think it's really helpful for obviously the many thousands of people who are living in shelter right now, and we want to kind of be part of that solution and really appreciate having an opportunity to talk about what we're trying to do here in New York with you.
Yes, guys. So thank you for coming to the podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for Laura for being our guest for this week. And please follow us on all social media platforms. I'm going to say again, please DM us if you have any problems. If you are in any part of the shelter world, I could try my best to help you. I do honestly mostly families with children, but I do have resources for other people in a different realms. I am not in housing. I can't help you with real estate that much. I'm sorry, guys. But I'm starting to do something on actually my personal YouTube channel of people who need housing for different vouchers that in New York City. So if you want to check out that, you could definitely do that. My link tree information is down below. It's always down below. And if you need certain resources, our resource stuff will also be in the link tree down below. So definitely go check that out. And hope to see you next week. And thank you for listening and thank you for sharing our podcast out to others. Have a good day and be safe.